to silence, and peaceful demonstrations are being suppressed. A significant case is that of the Special Regional Administration in Hong Kong, where extended powers for national security are used against civil society and human rights defenders, which have greatly reduced the vitality of an open and free public space. The authorities have used excessive force against demonstrators in Indonesia, in Kenya, in Togo and elsewhere. The freedom of the media is backsliding, and human rights defenders are criminalized from Egypt to the Russian Federation. The report on the rule of law of 2025 of the European Commission notes that civic space is being reduced in several member states of the European Union. Some are restricting peaceful demonstrations, and others are imposing restrictions which restrict the work of NGOs. Recently adopted laws in Ecuador could reduce responsibility of law enforcement bodies, extend the powers of the secret services, and restrict the civic space. Attacks against the Constitutional Court are unacceptable. The amnesty law adopted last month in Peru is backsliding for justice and truth. Brutal responses will only provoke more tension and violence.
Human rights law protects all, including the most vulnerable. Yet, attacks on minorities of all kinds are growing as states roll back commitments to tackle and prevent discrimination. Excessive use of force and deaths of people of African descent at the hands of law enforcement persist in many states, often rooted in systemic racism. Indigenous peoples continue to be denied their rights to land and to free, prior and informed consent in mining and other commercial projects. Violations against Roma are widespread in several European countries and beyond, including police violence, hate speech and systemic exclusion in health, education and housing. Representation of Roma in the European Parliament has shrunk to zero. In China, the progress we have sought for the protection of the rights of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang, as well as Tibetans in their regions, has yet to materialize. This is a priority for my office's engagement. Restrictions of the rights of LGBTQ+ people are growing in West Africa, where some countries have adopted or are considering laws that criminalize consensual same-sex relations. In the United Kingdom, people with disabilities will be disproportionately affected by planned cuts to health benefits. In Argentina, austerity measures are having the greatest impact on people with disabilities and older people. Several countries around the world are cutting crucial programs that protect women's rights, including support for survivors of violence and access to sexual and reproductive health care. Maternal mortality is a leading killer of the most marginalized women and girls. This is a tragedy because it is largely preventable. Afghanistan, where women's access to health care, among many other human rights, is severely restricted, has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. 4 years after the return of the Taliban, the erasure of women and girls from public life is almost complete. Policies and practices that violate the rights of migrants and refugees are becoming normalized in some countries. Pakistan and Iran have forcibly returned millions of Afghans to their country, and India has also deported groups of Rohingya Muslims by land and sea. I'm also concerned about recent measures taken by Germany, Greece, Hungary and other European countries to limit the right to seek asylum. The United States has reportedly reached agreement with several governments, including El Salvador, South Sudan, Eswatini and Rwanda, on deporting third-country nationals to places other than their homeland, raising concerns about compliance with international law. Kuwait has revoked the citizenship of thousands of people in recent years, leaving many stateless. In Cambodia, changes to the constitution and nationality law allow the authorities to remove citizenship in cases of treason, creating further ways for them to target their critics. In a positive development, North Macedonia has resolved all known cases of statelessness since the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, the first country in the region to do so. Excellencies, our human rights mechanisms, including this Council, are a force field that protects people against unrestrained power. They warn us of potential harm to come, and we need to heed those warnings. Hate speech is a sign of rising tensions that can lead to violence. Around the world, we witness growing anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, racism, and large-scale disinformation campaigns. In Chad, Nigeria, and other countries in the region, conflicts between herders and farmers are aggravated by hateful narratives, escalating to deadly clashes. From South Sudan to Syria, hate speech compounds tensions and widens divisions. The lies and nihilism that fragment societies online translate into real attacks on real people. In Cambodia and Thailand, for example, social media vitriol has been a factor in today's tensions. In Spain, online media were weaponized to instigate physical violence against migrants. In Serbia, online hate speech often goes unpunished. Civic space is rapidly shrinking, with dissent stigmatized, protesters and independent journalists targeted, and the use of excessive force by the police. I reiterate my call for restraint, dialogue and accountability. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, deliberately divisive narratives and historical revisionism continue to undermine peace and reconciliation. In the context of decades of dehumanization of the other, I welcome the recent initialing of a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This is an important step towards upholding and advancing human rights, reconciliation, healing, and lasting peace. We are ready to support both countries in this process. Freedom of expression is fundamental, but it does not protect those who use speech to spur violence and hatred. A growing number of leaders are now instrumentalizing freedom of expression to cover their own speech while silencing those who disagree. This must be called out each and every time. My office engages with national authorities, leaders and media to develop strategies to define and counter incitement to hatred. Elections are a litmus test for government's commitment to freedom of expression and assembly and the rule of law. Here, too, our human rights monitoring raises the alarm and helps to prevent violations. My office has been following preparations for upcoming elections in Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Malawi, Tanzania and Uganda. I'm deeply troubled that in many of these countries, the authorities are resorting to harassment, exclusion or detention of opposition leaders, restrictions on media freedom, bans on peaceful protest and crackdowns on human rights defenders. Such actions, coupled with disinformation campaigns and hate speech, could feed tensions, polarization and violence. I urge the authorities in these countries to reverse course immediately. Ahead of next year's election in Ethiopia, I am concerned about arbitrary detention of journalists and recent laws that may restrict freedom of association and expression. Against a backdrop of conflict in several regions, the Ethiopian authorities need to ensure conditions for fair, free and inclusive elections. I welcome the agreement for my office to establish a new presence in Bangladesh to support the transition process there. Excellencies, peace and security depend on full respect for human rights everywhere. When the Security Council, the General Assembly, this Council or other intergovernmental institutions discuss the human rights situation in a particular country, it is because this concerns us all in every country. The United Nations Charter gave birth to a new geopolitical era by enshrining the sovereign equality of states. National sovereignty is the foundation of multilateral institutions and international law. When states sign international agreements, they are exercising their national sovereignty, not limiting it. And with that sovereignty comes responsibility. Sovereignty does not mean ownership of people. All governments have a duty to treat all their people including their political opponents, fairly, to protect them from harm and to respect their fundamental human rights. When they abandon that responsibility, it affects us all. Multilateral conventions and agreements have won incredible support over the past 8 decades and continue to do so today. As sovereign states sign up to them, they guarantee greater freedom and protection for their people. Bhutan, Cameroon, Eritrea and Lebanon recently ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Dominica ratified the Convention Against Torture, and Bangladesh ratified its optional protocol. Malaysia and Vietnam have abolished the use of the death penalty for certain crimes, and I'm pleased to report that some member states are increasing their engagement with special rapporteurs and treaty bodies. Cuba, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Dominica, Guatemala, Iceland, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, Singapore, Suriname and Zambia recently accepted visits by special procedures mandate holders after more than 5 years. Libya recently accepted the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court for alleged crimes committed between 2011 and 2027. These are not empty gestures. They are tangible acts of leadership and responsibility. They confirm that the international system benefits states and their people in concrete and specific ways. When sovereign states fail to uphold perpetrators of the gravest crimes to account, it is important that others are able to step in through the principle of universal jurisdiction exercised in accordance with international law. For example, in Germany, a Syrian colonel of the former regime was sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity that took place in Syria, and a court in the Netherlands convicted a corporate executive for complicity in war crimes in Guinea and Liberia. And a federal court in the United States convicted a Gambian national on charges of torture. Within sovereign states, stakeholders beyond the government can also step up for human rights. I'm very encouraged by the growing number of cities and regions that are integrating human rights into urban governance. Cities have long been cradles of diversity and freedom, values that test authoritarian rule. Our recent guidelines set out exactly what cities and regions can do to protect their people and their rights. National human rights institutions are another important defense against discrimination, abuse and the erosion of the rule of law. For example, the UNHRC in South Africa is taking legal action to address hate speech. The UNHRC in the Philippines has highlighted the impact of fossil fuels on the human rights of marginalized groups. Support for the independence and effectiveness of these national institutions is crucial. Civil society and social movements often drive transformational change, from anti-racism and feminism to climate activism. They are natural partners of my office, and we intend to work more closely together in the future. Philanthropists are key partners to help achieve positive change on the ground. I encourage them to collaborate and amplify their influence. The human rights and humanitarian communities find common ground in protecting civilians from the impact of conflict and crisis, and we must do more to strengthen this essential partnership. Señor Presidente, la educación en materia de derechos humanos es una de las herramientas e inversiones más importantes que tenemos para promover la libertad, evitar la discriminación y fomentar la cohesión. Me congratulo por el compromiso.
Human rights education is one of the most important tools and investments that we have to promote the future of our young people. I am delighted at the commitment and progress of some member states, from Guyana through to Mongolia, the Middle East and South Africa. We're supporting efforts to develop human rights study plans to raise up the voices of young people and to promote civic participation. But we must do much more. Each and every boy and girl, whether in the future they work in agriculture, the digital sphere, medicine or in trade, must know that human rights are our right from birth and that they affect and concern us one and all. I call on all member states to take measures and next year to share at the 63rd session of the Council their strategy
to ensure that the population are learning about human rights throughout their whole lives?
Mr. President, as my update shows, there are coordinated efforts to undermine human rights and the rule of law around the world. When states cut ties with the system or try to weaken it, when they isolate themselves, everybody loses. In response, we need a cross-regional movement to defend the international system. That is the only viable path to reach collective solutions to the existential threats we face today. Therefore, I hope to work with you on a new initiative through an alliance of member states, philanthropists, civil society and others to strengthen the human rights ecosystem and join the dots between abuses and violations and crisis prevention. This will contribute to achieving the goal of the Secretary-General's UNHRC initiative to improve coordination and to deliver better for the people we serve. We are working to convene this alliance on several fronts. First, we will enhance our engagement with all governments, even in the face of fierce disagreement, encouraging frank exchanges and keeping dialogue open. What gives me hope is that the vast majority of people around the world are crying out for human rights and freedoms. Second, we will reinforce the value of human rights to every citizen and every government through positive narratives and creative outreach. Third, we will harness innovation for human rights, including AI, by strengthening our partnerships with tech companies, academics, civil society and more. Fourth, we will develop and grow support for the human rights economy together with our partners. And fifth, with your support, we will bolster sustainable funding for human rights work by identifying new avenues and models. Because history has shown time and again that no one is safe when human rights are under attack. Abuses committed against one group are always part of a broader pattern of oppression and lead to the wider erosion of fundamental freedoms. Human rights are meant to challenge our assumptions, to identify the blind spots and encourage self-critical reflection because no one is perfect. Our human rights mechanisms are one of the only parts of the multilateral system that has teeth. I encourage you to use them. Engaging with my office and the human rights system as a whole is valuable not for engagement's sake, but to achieve tangible progress for people everywhere. Together, we must refuse to back down in the face of discrimination, distortion and lies. Together, we need to safeguard 80 years of progress on freedom, equality and justice. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed, High Commissioner. We will now take a brief break before undertaking the enhanced interactive dialogue on the human rights situation in Myanmar. Thank you.
Excellences, distingués collègues, nous allons maintenant entamer le dialogue interactif renforcé sur la situation des droits humains des musulmans Rohingyas et d'autres minorités au Myanmar. Merci. J'ai l'honneur d'accueillir M. Volker Türk, haut commissaire aux droits de l'homme, qui prononcera la déclaration d'ouverture. Permettez-moi également de souhaiter la bienvenue à nos distingués intervenants. M. Nicolas Koumjian, chef du mécanisme d'enquête indépendant pour le Myanmar, merci d'être là. Nous aurons Moon Nai Lee, défenseur des droits humains au Myanmar par vidéo. Lucky Karim, directrice exécutive de Femmes réfugiées pour la paix et la justice. Et Saouk, défenseur des droits humains au Myanmar. Merci à vous aussi d'être présents. La liste des orateurs sera close dans 15 minutes. Est-ce que, chers collègues, je vous prie de prendre vos places et de continuer vos petites discussions utiles et nécessaires hors de cette magnifique salle, s'il vous plaît. Un peu de calme. Merci. Je passe la parole à l'haut-commissaire. Monsieur Volker Türk, vous avez la parole.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished participants, the human rights situation in Myanmar is plumbing new depths, with civilians throughout the country suffering the cruelest toll. Since the coup, more than 7,000 civilians have been killed by the military, and some 30,000 people have been arrested on political grounds. In August alone, a reported 277 civilians were killed across the country. After resuming ground operations, the military is once again burning villages at alarming rates and abducting and forcibly recruiting civilians. In one of many documented incidents that reveal an utter disregard for civilian lives, in March, the military attacked a market in Let Ban Ha village in Mandalay. According to witnesses, a jet fighter circled the area, diving and climbing several times before dropping two 500-pound bombs on the crowded market, killing at least 27 civilians. While their activities are far smaller in scale and intensity, anti-military armed groups have also killed people perceived to be affiliated with the military, used landmines and forcibly recruited civilians. The humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate. Military blockades have driven food prices up to record levels. The cost of an average diet rose by 30% compared to last year, while household incomes have plummeted. Nearly a third of the country's population, some 15.2 million people, are facing acute food insecurity this year. That represents an increase of almost 2 million people in a year. Some 350,000 people have been displaced in Rakhine and Chin states since November 2023, and some 150,000 Rohingya have crossed into Bangladesh seeking safety. Reported figures of 3.3 million displaced since the coup are likely an underestimation. Excellencies, the decades-long persecution of the Muslim Rohingya minority in Rakhine State has escalated. Over the past 14 months, fighting in Rakhine has reached a fever pitch as the Arakan army and other armed groups have joined the campaign of cruelty against civilians. 8 years after the Myanmar military killed tens of thousands of Rohingya, inflicted widespread sexual violence and triggered an exodus of 700,000 people to Bangladesh, the Arakan army has taken control of nearly all of Rakhine State. It has killed, abducted, tortured, arbitrarily detained and forcibly recruited Rohingya and burned homes and villages. In one awful example, on 5 and 6 August 2024, drones and artillery strikes killed hundreds of Rohingya civilians who had gathered along the Naf riverbank or were already on boats trying to flee to Bangladesh. Survivors attributed these strikes to the Arakan army. As the Myanmar military has lost ground, it has increasingly used aerial attacks against civilians across Rakhine and committed grave violations of human rights, including killing civilians, destroying property, arbitrarily arresting and torturing people, and forcibly recruiting them into ranks. Rohingya armed groups are also committing abuses against civilians, including killings, forced recruitment and displacement. Some of the videos and images in northern Rakhine from the second half of 2024 are reminiscent of 2017. While there are no comprehensive verified figures during the reporting period, thousands of civilians are alleged to have been killed, with tens of thousands more fleeing violence. Violations and abuses by both the Arakan army and the military have gone unpunished. Rohingya reportedly left their homes ahead of clashes or because of targeted violence by the Arakan army, whose fighters had threatened or attacked those who refused to leave. Rohingya have also reported growing restrictions and surveillance of their communities, including internet shutdowns and seizure of mobile phones. These have hampered our ability to document fully all violations. Other minority communities, including ethnic Rakhine, are also suffering under airstrikes and artillery barrages, resulting in untold numbers of killings and mass displacement. Military blockades have severely restricted humanitarian access. Hunger and malnutrition are at an all-time high, with 57% of families unable to meet basic food needs. Amid growing violations and violence, the military is now seeking legitimacy by organizing military-controlled elections. The people of Myanmar demand justice, peace, and democratic, civilian-run institutions, as my report in June highlighted. Conditions do not exist for free and representative elections. I echo ASEAN's view that de-escalation and humanitarian access are the way out of this crisis, not elections. The military must implement Security Council Resolution 2669, which demands an immediate end to all forms of violence, urges the release of arbitrarily detained prisoners, and calls for constructive dialogue, reconciliation and respect for human rights. All parties need to allow humanitarian relief to civilians in need and to lift all restrictions. Parties in Rakhine must respect in full the provisional measures imposed by the International Court of Justice to protect Rohingya lives. Excellencies, for more than 4 years now, my office has reported horrible violations to this Council. We have issued recommendations for action to stop the wanton violence and rampant impunity, as have other human rights mechanisms. You, the international community, have all the information you need to act. I repeat my call for the Security Council to refer the full situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court. I'm encouraged by the actions taken by the International Criminal Court, including the prosecutor's application for an arrest warrant against the Commander-in-Chief of the Myanmar military, Min Aung Hlaing, for alleged crimes against humanity, as well as the prosecutor's indication that more such applications would follow. I also welcome the imposition by several countries and one regional organization of targeted sanctions against individuals and companies in Myanmar. But much more is clearly needed. States need urgently to stop the flow of arms into Myanmar, including jet fuel and dual-use goods, and to resume peace-building efforts. Finally, I once again urge all governments to do everything possible to protect people fleeing the conflict in Myanmar, including by search and rescue operations at sea, and to refrain from refoulements, including pushbacks. I encourage them to create safe and dignified pathways for international refugee protection and resettlement, particularly for the Rohingya. The high-level conference on the Rohingya at the General Assembly later this month is an opportunity for the international community to back its words of support with concrete action. We must hear and heed the voices from Myanmar calling for peace and for democratic, civilian-run institutions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je donne la parole à M. Nicolas Koumjian pour sa présentation. Vous avez la parole.
Merci, Mr. President, Excellencies. It is an honor